Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. The Father Joe podcast, proudly supported by Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln. Stress-free car shopping. That's what you get at Star Lincoln. It's their mission to be the automotive home of drivers right here in Southeast Lower Michigan. Star Lincoln provides an incredible selection of new and used vehicles, exceptional car care, customer service with a cup of coffee and a smile. Trust me and Father Joe, we're both driving that new Lincoln MKC from Star Lincoln. I absolutely love my Lincoln MKC. Star Lincoln also keeps a pristine stock of used cars, trucks, SUVs. Why not shop online at starlincoln.com? Hoot McInerney, Star Lincoln, on 12 Mile Road, just east of Telegraph in Southfield. Oh yeah, you know it's the home of the Father Joe Grimaldi Star Treatment. I apologize for laughing. It's great to have you alongside Father Joe Grimaldi and Ken Calvert here. Today, I have decided that the best way I can describe this first podcast is, Lucy, you got a lot of explaining to do. Lucy was always getting in trouble, and so am I. So, first of all, how are you?
I'm doing great. What about you, Ken?
Not bad. Another day, another ray. You know, when I say, Lucy, you got some explaining to do. Father Joe Grimaldi, you got some explaining to do. I've got pieces of paper everywhere this week, and so let me start with this. When did the whole Jewish-Christian split basically occur?
Yeah. I think it's erroneous to think that there was a specific date, huh? Mm-hmm. Because the way things developed, you had Jews worshiping in the temple as usual, but they started to... This is, after the resurrection, of course. They started to believe in the ways of Jesus, the ways of Christ. And so they were developing alongside of their regular worship, which was the Jewish rites. And so it was not like a definitive thing that happened all of a sudden. It was something that eventually got to the point where the Orthodox Jews did not want this group around anymore. It was very hard to tell that these people were not Jews anymore because they certainly followed the rituals of the Jewish rite, and yet their beliefs were with Jesus Christ. And so it was one of these things that for a long time, I'm talking hundreds of years, that people felt, oh, they were part of it, they weren't part of it, and so on. But eventually, after the temple was burnt down in the year 70, I believe it was, and things changed radically, and it didn't take as long. But I would say it didn't happen that quickly either, even though the temple was burnt down.
Who burnt it down?
Supposedly the Romans and, the non-Jews. And so they felt, we got to get this group out of here, and they tried, and they did, but they didn't. And the reason I'm sounding so, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think it's a definitive thing, Mm-hmm. It's something that evolved, It's not something that was definitively split immediately. Then eventually, of course, with time, there was a different identity between Christianity and the Jews. So that even in the beginning, for example, we see in Rome, you have the Emperor Constantine all of a sudden making Rome Christian, whether they liked it or not, if you want,
Yeah.
Well, Christianity was definitely part of that as early as the year 300. But still, many of the new Christians were also Jews at the same time.
That's interesting and confusing at the same time. But as you've mentioned before, and we all know this, the Jews have been persecuted forever.
Yes.
So it basically started in 70 A.D. when they burnt down the temple. I mean...
What started?
The actual persecution, the actual...
Way before that.
Oh, it did?
Way before Christ.
Now, wait a minute. The persecution of the Jews started way before Christ?
Yes.
Okay.
If you look at a number of the cities throughout Europe, you'll see areas where the Jews would have to limit themselves to. They couldn't leave that area. Particularly in Rome. What's fascinating in Rome, there's a whole Jewish section that originated as an area where only the place for the Jews to be was in that area. They couldn't interact with other people. So they were persecuted for a long time. And they still are. They still are.
Yeah.
I believe that. Obviously, with what you see happening throughout the world. I don't know whether it's a matter of jealousy or whether it's a matter of how can these people, being such a small group of people, yet have so much power, so much intelligence, so much energy, that you wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, that can cause, it can cause a little bit of envy.
The reason why I brought that up is because I wanted to ask you, and basically the title of this is going to be, either way, it's the Sabbath for both Jews and for Christians, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Jews celebrate the Sabbath differently than we do.
Correct.
Why?
Well, the ritual of the Jewish people was not exactly the same as the ritual for the Christians.
Mm-hmm.
For example,
Yeah.
the reason why Sunday has become the day for the Christians is because we believe that Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday.
Mm.
And therefore, Sunday becomes the important day of the week for Christians. Whereas the Sabbath was always the day that was respected by the Jewish people. So the Sabbath would be Saturday. That word is such an interesting word to me that, for example, the Italian word for Saturday is sabato, which means Sabbath. Okay, so even taking it to the regular calendar, Saturday is the Sabbath, and that's the Jewish day for serious religion, if you want. And so the two are different because you have two different rituals. With the Christians, after the resurrection, people started to gather in small groups, and they would go to pray together. And one of the things that always came about was Scripture. Then another thing, of course, was celebrating the way Jesus celebrated the Last Supper. They remembered a lot of the words that were said. Now, what's interesting is that so many of those people who had been Jews, they never really got away from it. So if you look at the words of the consecration, if you look at the words of the offertory, they're almost direct translations from the Jewish. Receive this bread, this blood. So it's kind of interesting how one evolved into something else. But in the beginning, it was small groups of people. I think when we look at the religion as Catholics, our religion as Catholics, we tend to see all centuries the same way. Well, they weren't. I mean, in the beginning, it was these small groups getting together to pray, and then we started to see some abuses. So rules had to be established. So things became much more codified, if you want, much more defined as time went on, until it developed into what we've had for the last many centuries. And only God knows what will happen in the future. But right now, this is what we've been doing for many centuries. The consecration, we have this bread and wine, which remain looking like bread and wine, we believe become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And of course, in recent times, you and I have seen where even surveys that have been taken, we're having a problem with people not believing that the bread and wine has truly been transubstantiated into the body and blood of Christ. They believe to see it as a symbol. Well, I want to say that it's both a symbol and a reality. The reality, of course, is the sacrifice, and it's the transformation of that bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. Symbolically, they're using bread and wine. Why? Jesus wanted to be sure that he would be as accessible as possible for all peoples. The common food was bread, the common drink was wine. So those are the two staples. And of course, you can't get more ordinary, general if you want, than bread and wine. This is what has been for many, many centuries. That part of it, I don't believe will ever change. Now, what we do around it might change. The different aspects of the liturgy might change. But that part of it, the consecration, the offertory, and so on and so forth, communion, I don't think is going to change.
Unleavened bread, correct?
Correct, yeah.
What does unleavened bread mean?
It's bread that doesn't use any yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for example, we go back to the Passover because the Mass originally
Once again, we're going back to the Jewish roots.
Oh, you always do. Yeah, always do. The Passover was the celebration of the God's love and care of the Jewish people. So much so that they had to move fast because they were being persecuted. And so, sure enough, they had to have bread immediately. Remember the sacrifice of the lamb and the blood put on the lintels of the doors of the various places where the Jews were, so that when the spirit of death came, it avoided those people where they had been practicing Jews. They were on the run, so they had to have unleavened bread. They didn't have time for the bread to rise and then bake.
I see. Wow.
Yeah.
I always thought that was kind of macabre.
Yeah.
The fact that you had to put the blood of a lamb on your door.
Okay, yes.
I know it reflected the times, but it still, I find it a little...
Sure, I know what you mean.
I mean, I find it a little... like
blood always does that.
Yeah.
Whether it's animal blood or human blood.
All right, a real quick backstory question for you.
Sure.
Or let's go backwards here for a second. When did it become a host? Since I've been around.
Yeah, but I think it's a matter of definition. When I say definition, I mean
but
it became defined.
You're constantly talking about the fact that people sometimes don't have the feeling that, indeed, people often may challenge the fact that a host is actually
transubstantiation
into the body of Christ. Okay?
Correct, yeah.
But it'll be a compressed little piece of bread. Is that how it works? Is it that simple?
You're trying to establish a time. Things evolve. They don't necessarily happen on a particular day.
Right, I know.
Okay?
That's me.
When Jesus, when he said, "This is my body, this is my blood," and people grumbled about it, he didn't say, "Oh, I don't mean exactly," but he said, "Yeah, this is my body, this is my blood. And whoever eats this, eats my flesh, will have life forever." And so, when you look at the interpretation of that, it was bread and wine, but he still said, "This is my body, this is my blood." Now, as time went on, the bread was broken up, and passed on to the other. And what happened was there were some abuses here and there. So along the way, and it may have taken hundreds of years, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, we have to refine this a little bit. And so they refined it as the unleavened bread became more uniform. It became much more what we look at today, until it did become what it is today, the wafer. Does it have to be a wafer? No, it has to be unleavened bread. Does the wine have to be wine? Yes, it does.
Okay.
The nearest thing that you have to wine that isn't wine, but yet it is must. And that is used when they bring the bread and wine to prisons. Not all prisons accept it, but they will accept must for the most part, not all of them. Must is the grape juice before it becomes wine. So it's not really alcoholic, but it's approaching alcohol, I should say. And so what happens is that, even when you have people that are bringing the communion to the prisoners, they not always bring the wine because it's difficult to get permission to do that. But in places where they allow it, it has to be must. It cannot be wine, full-fledged wine.
All right, getting near the end of the podcast. Why did, I know,
Fast.
I know, you always think we're moving too quickly. I'm still wondering why the Jews celebrate. I wanted to get into the division of the Orthodox Jews versus just the
conservative
Jews, but that's
and
not
progressive,
and that's that's not necessarily going to be the topic. It's the Sabbath that we're talking about. Okay, why do the Jews celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday, and Catholics, Christians around the world celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday?
Yeah.
Can you answer that in its simplest form?
The simplest form, Saturday is the seventh day of the week. And
then why don't we treat Saturday?
Because we believe that Jesus rose on a Sunday. And because that's so much more important, the Sunday takes over.
Okay.
That becomes, we don't call it the Sabbath. As I said earlier in the podcast, I did mention that the word Sabbath is not unlike the word for Saturday
in Italian.
Yeah, but in other languages as well. In French, it's samedi, which is a little bit different, but Sabbath is the key word. We believe in the resurrection, and the resurrection is a very important part of our religion. It's our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at the Sunday, that becomes our day of worship. Saturday becomes the day of worship for the Jewish people.
We are technically not supposed to work on Sunday.
Right, correct.
That's supposed to be a day of rest.
Correct.
The Jewish people believe that Saturday, the Sabbath, is a day of rest. No one really abides by that. I mean, for the most part.
The Jews do.
They do.
Are you living in Detroit? You'll find stores in Detroit that are closed on Saturday, even though it could be a very high business day. There are many places where you would like to go shop and you can't and it's a Saturday because the world does treat Saturday as a day off for workers and so on and so forth.
It's the weekend.
It's the weekend. But for the Jewish people, Saturday is very, very crucial. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they're not working. The stores are closed. You have to go to haberdasheries where they sell clothes and stuff like that. That's closed. No way are you going to get in. Now, what's happened...
Cemeteries are closed on Saturdays.
Everything would. Any place that requires any type of movement on the human person is going to be out. Now, you're right in that many people don't observe it as much as they should and could, according to their law. The same thing is true of Catholics. Okay, for Catholics, Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest. You're not supposed to be going around doing laundry. You're not supposed to be going around doing your shopping. You're not supposed to be doing all of that. Well, we have eased off on that for one reason or another, so that we don't necessarily abide by that in any way. Because any place you go on a Sunday, you're going to see people, well, that's when they have great sales at the stores, and people go running to the stores to buy this, that, or the other thing. Or they have to fix the washing machine that broke during the week. Well, Sunday is the time they're going to fix that washing machine.
Yeah.
So, you maybe today, but in the past, the Jewish people would never touch that. You couldn't do that. That was it. You could not fix. You couldn't fix the washing machine. Okay,
really
is what I'm getting at. But
no, I understand that.
And then for Catholics, though, it can't be that serious. Of course, we're not. It's not a lot of work. All we're doing is this, that, or the other thing. We're having fun doing it. Like the guy who likes to play around with his cars. He wants to fix the car, change the tires, do something.
There you go.
Yeah, but years ago, the Jewish people would never think of doing that at all. There are many people like that today, by the way, among the Jews. There are not many people among the Catholics that are doing that on Sunday. So it's interesting how things evolve culturally in a different way.
I just realized something. My mom died, passed away. It was January 14th, 1972. I was only 20 years old, 19 or 20. But I remember well enough that my parents used to go for a Sunday drive. My mom would get dressed up, as would my father, or they would already be dressed up because of Mass. Long story short, maybe that was in accordance with or just something to do, but they used to love to go for a Sunday drive.
Culturally, that disappeared because all of a sudden stores were open on Sunday. They were not open in the past. Okay?
Right.
So you couldn't go grocery shopping. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. So you were, in a way, and I hate to use the word forced, but you were going to use that as a day of relaxation. And so driving, seeing people, visiting with people, talking with people, that was a common thing on Sunday in the old days. But once the stores became very powerful with sales and opening the doors up, sometimes overnight if you want, people love to do that. They'll go buying stuff and so on. So that already started to disappear. Huh?
Yeah.
I always loved, having lived in Rome for 3 years, well, one of the things in Rome, they take their relaxation seriously, at least they used to. So, for example, what I'm getting at is... and I'm speaking about a cultural thing, not a religious thing at this point. But culturally, what they would do is they would have a very little breakfast, go to work, then start taking off from work at about 11:30. They would have this very lavish dinner that lasted forever, what we used to call the Sunday dinner, but they would do it every day. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, at about, they go to bed afterwards. They wouldn't wake up till about 4 o'clock. The reason I'm mentioning that, as soon as tourists started to complain, here we are. We've come from a long ways just to visit your country. We can't even buy anything. We can't even eat anything. The stores are closed. The restaurants are closed. Well, little by little by little, that's gone. If you go to Rome, you could go and have lunch anywhere, okay? The stores are open. The restaurants are open. Yeah. And so people no longer do that. That used to be. Now, you can find that custom, that cultural thing in some small, out-of-the-way towns.
Right.
But not in the major cities anymore. That's gone. Well, I think that's the same thing with your parents.
Yeah.
Taking the drive on Sunday. That was a beautiful day to reminisce, to talk, and all of these other things. And that's gone because the stores are much more powerful.
Yeah. Now people can buy a bobblehead of the Pope on a Sunday in Rome.
Yes. They couldn't before. And here we've traveled all this distance.
We got to get you a bobblehead. That just gave me a great idea.
I don't need a bobblehead.
A Father Joe bobblehead. Boy, I'll tell you what, you couldn't keep them on the shelves. I'm telling you that right now. So today we have discussed, and I think we did you did a great job. A thorough job of discussing the Sabbath, how we, I think, celebrate the Sabbath, both Jews and Christians.
Sure.
And all of our brothers and sisters.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, we all are brothers and sisters. I mean, let's face it, folks. So, well, thank you. Good job.
Happy to be able to do it.
Yeah, you're a heck of a... I'm looking at I'm pausing. I'm looking at you like, how's a bobblehead going to look?
Go away. Don't even think about it.
Do I have them in I think I'm going to put you in one of the old-fashioned, maybe a little cape. Oh, yeah. Maybe a Beretta.
A Beretta, too.
Yeah. Just to cheese you off.
All right.
Because you were never a big fan of the Beretta. Everybody, I'm Ken Calvert, and alongside Father Joe Grimaldi, we look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Bobblehead Podcast.
I look forward to it as well. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.